I find there's a very fine line between contentment and complacency. In fact, one of the older dictionaries that I've looked up complacency in actually uses the word contentment in its definition. In fact, it says that complacency is contentment to a fault. Now, I think that based on my faith, on my religious belief, that contentment is something to be decided upon. It's an attitude that we have toward life, that what we have been given, what we have been provided, what opportunities lie in front of us is sufficient for our joy, for our peace, for our goodness. That it's not necessary that we fight and struggle and strive and take from other people in order to have more for us to be content. Now, there's a challenge with that, especially when we look at the Western world and our own explanation of what a good life is. I was listening recently to the ideas of liberty, which we've talked about in the previous episode. The idea that liberty comes from a sense of well-being, it comes from a sense of good, it comes from the right to have, to pursue, to gain. And yet a lot of the people who sought liberty for the sake of others, think that one through for a second, they sought liberty for the sake of others, meaning, for an example, the imperialists. When the British Empire was marching across the world and setting itself up as the ideal model of society, there were places where what was contentment for the average British citizen was not normal for the land that they were conquering. I remember chatting with a young man in the Congo, and he related to me that when he was growing up and going through his grammar school and what we would consider middle school, or his secondary education in high school, that his teachers would often recall how the colonizers, European colonizers, came into the Congo and would instantly classify people who ate with their fingers as barbarians. If you didn't use utensils, certainly there was something wrong with you. If you didn't prefer to put your food on a plate in an organized fashion and use your utensils from the outside to the inside, and the little dessert fork at the top and your cup just so, etc. And I still get confused if I go into a hotel or a banquet room or a nice restaurant and there's 4 forks. Which one do I use first? And for what? In high society, there's a reason that all those things are separate. There's a different spoon for your coffee than there is for your ice cream. There's a different fork for your dessert than there is for your salad. And that level of sophistication, in many places, they're just not content until everyone does it like that. An imperialist worldview might look at a culture that prefers to eat with their fingers and eat everything that is a finger food, even if we might look at it and go, that's really not a finger food. An example might be Hawaiian poi. Poi looks like you should eat it with a straw or a spoon if you choose to eat it at all. But most Hawaiians that I know eat it with their fingers. Many times that I've been in the Congo, I've seen many people in coat and tie sitting at the dinner table. Fork never moves. They eat 90% of what's on their plate with their fingers. And it's perfectly normal. Is it complacency that allows them to be content to a fault, to say, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing, it doesn't need to change. I'm okay with it just like it is? Or is it a sense of contentment and satisfaction with their own society, with the way things are, to accept their lot in life, to be okay with it just like it is? See, Western civilization has not only instilled a set of societal expectations on behavior, but also set the bar really high on what we would call achievement. There's a demand almost, if you're going to marry the right person, if you're going to live in the right place, if you're going to drive the right kind of car, that you have to hang with the right kind of people to do that. You have to have a certain level of education, a certain level of sophistication, a certain je ne sais quoi. And you have to have this ability to separate yourself from the herd to be recognized. In fact, there was a season that my wife and I were listening to some audio CDs, and one of the main points of this audio CD, and it's distinguishable once you recognize what this philosophy looks like. It's easy to see it. It's indistinguishable, other than to say, well, there's the class warfare of the haves and the have-nots. But there really is a different way of seeing other people, a different way of positioning ourselves, a different way of relating to other people that separates the haves from the have-nots. And it's not necessarily about bank account size, although there seems to be a direct correlation. There are ways that the wealthy, if you want to classify it that way, and that is a very ambiguous term, it might mean you have hundreds of thousands in the bank and lots of real estate. It may mean you have multiple millions in the bank and even more real estate, or it may mean that you've just learned to separate yourself from the herd in the way that you think, the way that you talk, the way that you educate your children, the way that you expect your children to behave in public, etc., etc. And there are certain rules, if you will. Things that the wealthy, the way that they expect their children to behave, the things that they would say, the types of friends that they would be home and that they would bring home, that those things are very particular. And there are some of those that are secret. And when you begin to see and hear them, and you recognize that person really does see themselves as a different class of person. Now, those who have learned humility and contentment, their persona, their personality, their who, really does have the ability to be the same who, whether they have millions in the bank or nothing in the bank. And that type of personality, that level of contentment, that peace that comes with understanding that what I have doesn't make me. Who I am is what makes me. That level of contentment is a powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. That contentment that says, my conversation with you is no different, whether you have $10 million in the bank or 10 cents in your pocket. I see you as a human being, and we're fair, and we're equal, and we're even, and I will treat you with the same dignity and the same respect that I would anybody else in the world. Now, think to yourself, when was the last time you met someone with their nose in the air? They felt themselves a little better than you, a little different than you, maybe because they felt like they were dressed better than you, had more money than you, whatever it was. There are those who raise their families, raise their children, instruct their children to behave in such a way as to separate themselves from those other people. And you'll hear it in their language, you'll hear it in the things that they say, you'll observe it in the way that they treat other people. That's not contentment. That's class warfare. And there oftentimes falls within that class warfare a complacency that says, you know, we've always been different. We've always been better. We've always had more. We don't need to fight and struggle with those people. The result of that often becomes the complacency that says, there is no risk to me. I can do what I want to. I can behave as I want to. I see the world in such a way that I've kind of got this thing figured out. Recently, a political candidate said, I think I could probably murder someone in public and get away with it at this point. Regardless of what your thoughts are on politics, the statement itself decries a complacency at a very high level, an ability to perceive themselves in a different capacity of personhood, with a different level of rights and privileges and advantages and opportunities. Unfortunately, there's a complacency that's also being embedded in our society by modern culture, by conversations, by media. A complacency that says, I'm not going to be any better than I am. I am not going to behave any differently than I do. I'm not going to have any more than I have now. And it's somebody else's fault. And contentment to have what you have and be okay with that, whether that's $10 or 10 million, that's a personal struggle of humility. And I can tell you that there are people who are just as discontent with their $10 or their $10,000 or their $10 million as those who have everything in their mind laid out. That they've got the right education, they've got the right job, they've got the right house, they got the family, they got the friends, they got it all wired. They've got the world by the tail, but they're struggling for more. And then there are those who have nothing, and they're struggling for everything. I've also met those who have, by the world's standards, well, nothing, but they're content. Content to the point that what little they have, they would give away. What little they have, they would share as quickly as they would ask for help. Sometimes they would share more quickly than they would ask for help. That level of contentment, it's not about how much you have. It's about what kind of who you are. And that really is a big, big deal. But don't mistake that being content with what you have means that you stop striving for more. And this, I think, is the biggest challenge. I know it is for me. Because the fine line between contentment and complacency is so fine, and yet it's a slippery slope. Contentment is like a high plateau. It's a high ledge. It's a place that we reach in our own personhood and our own humility and our own understanding of our value of ourself that has little to do with our worldly means or material gains. It has to do with, can I look in the mirror and be satisfied with the person who looks back at me? Do I look at that person and think, I like you. I like the who that you've become. I truly believe that contentment begins there. But it doesn't mean that we don't try to constantly improve the who that we are. Most religious beliefs hold the truth that we are not yet in our perfect state. Whether you call that heaven or nirvana, the likeness of Christ or the imitation of Buddha, we're not there yet. And to stop striving to be better, to love more, to give more, to be more, to stop all those things is, well, complacency. It's contentment to a fault. It's to look in the mirror and go, I'm so okay with me, I don't need to do any more. I don't need to forgive anymore. I don't need to love anymore. I don't need to work any harder. My 40-hour work week, 39 hours and 52 minutes is plenty. My 50-hour work week, well, that's enough. I'll stop there. I don't need to look for a raise. I don't need to ask for a promotion. I don't need to educate myself more to be better in my job. I'm good right where I'm at. Let me ask this question, though. If you reach that level of contentment that you stop striving, do you begin to occupy a place in the world that perhaps belongs to someone else? I remember going to work for a gentleman in San Antonio, and when I took the job, he said, You know, I learned early on to hire people smarter than myself and then do all I can to work myself out of a job. And I thought, that doesn't really make any sense. But the more I thought about it and the more I referenced that ideology in the pursuit of my own career goals, my own growth, my own education goals, my own influence, what I find is that leadership, good leadership, creates a vacuum. Good leadership creates a vacuum because good leaders are upwardly mobile. We've talked before about the 5 levels of leadership, how it starts with rights, and then it moves forward from rights to permission, and then that influence continues to grow. Well, as it does, as a person moves up the scale in leadership, they leave an empty space below where they used to be. If you have reached a place in your life where you're simply not growing anymore, what happens to the flow of those who are continually trying to be a little better than they were yesterday? Be a little more educated, be a little more influential, have a little more opportunity. What happens to them? Are you guarding the way? Are you blocking the way? Are you stopping them from moving on? Have you become so complacent in your leadership that you're not creating space for someone else to fill? That you're not moving up and moving on and moving forward in a way that someone else could come in behind you and take the place you occupy now? Are you creating a vacuum with your leadership that not only demands and requires that the people you influence get better, they grow, but that you add value to them in a way that you make room for them. You create a space for them. I truly believe that the attitude of lack that many of us are driven by, that if Charlie has 3 pieces of pie and I only have 2 pieces of pie, that the only way for me to get more pie is for Charlie to give up some of his pie. That's a worldview. It's a philosophy that becomes complacency very easy if Charlie's refusing to give up his portion of the pie. But what it fails to understand is that Charlie doesn't have to give up his pie. If Charlie and I work together, Charlie's 3 pieces and my 2 pieces could be significantly larger. They may still be 2 pieces and 3 pieces, but my 2 pieces will be much larger than they were before because together we can create a larger pie. Complacency doesn't allow room for that. Complacency says, I'm done. I've reached the pinnacle. I'm as good as I'm going to get. I don't need to strive for any more. There's a smugness almost to complacency. And again, the irony is there are many people who have very little, if any, who are complacent. They've become content even with their miserable life. Yes, you heard me. There are those who are content with their miserable life because they don't take responsibility for it. They blame their status, their income, their education on somebody else. I'm content to sit here in my pig swallow and wander in the mud because it was my fault. I blame someone else. Perhaps you know someone like that. Perhaps you see them every morning when you brush your teeth. They've given up on life. They're not pursuing better. They're not happy with what they have, but they've allowed contentment, acceptance, the ability to say, well, this is my lot, and I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to pretend to be happy here. They've allowed that type of an attitude to overwhelm their willingness to succeed, their drive to do better, their opportunity to leave a space for their leadership to create a vacuum. So they've given up. They just sit down right where they're at, and they rot. And whatever influence they may have had is gone. And whatever grand discoveries they might have been used to reveal to the world, they won't happen. And whatever invention might be inside their head, it'll stay there. And it is of those who have moved from the place of contentment to complacency But the old story is written, when you pass by the graveyard, you see the saddest thing in the world. It's the place where all the dreams are buried. It's the complacent who are buried along with their dreams. It is the complacent who had opportunity, but they weren't prepared for it. So luck never came. John Maxwell says it all the time, and I'll wrap up with this. He says, luck is the intersection where opportunity meets preparedness. It was called to my memory not too long ago as I was having a conversation with someone else that I had an occasion to be in the room with a well-known public speaker by the name of Steve Siebold. And he was talking about the process of becoming an apprentice and how that introduction from the qualified person to the opportunistic apprentice, where that relationship became an introduction of opportunity. How that juxtaposition might pass by. And like the genius that we have, that 37-second genius, that opportunity intersection is a high-speed intersection. And on one path is preparedness and on the other is opportunity. And where they collide, many call it luck. But that moment of opportunity may pass by at a high rate of speed and never again, that moment. And if your preparedness isn't locked and loaded, you'll watch opportunity go by and all you can do is wave. As I stood in that room, I met a lady who is responsible for hiring significant numbers of public speakers, motivational speakers, and trainers. And I listened to her presentation, and I listened to Steve's presentation, and I listened to a few other people speak. And when the opportunity afforded itself, I simply wanted to say to her, hey, thank you for what you had to say. It was very insightful, and it was very enlightening to me. So I approached her, as many people did, with no hope, with no intention of anything other than to say thank you. And so out of kindness, I guess, out of courtesy, she said, so are you a speaker? And I said, I am. And she said, and what do you speak about? And I told her. And now this event, this encounter was about 7.5 years ago. I was nowhere near where I am now from a preparedness standpoint, from a content standpoint, from a presentation skills standpoint. I had not yet competed in the World Championship of Public Speaking. I had not yet written my first full piece of curriculum that was my own content. I hadn't done any of that stuff. But I shared with her one piece of content that I had written that was kind of in its, I don't know, it was probably about 3/4 done. I shared the idea with her and the premise. And in just my ability to articulate the premise, she was sold. And she asked that question that in that moment I thought, let me put this on pause. Let me put this on hold. I'll come back to it. I answered her question with a delay. And I don't just mean I took a breath and I waited, but I said, let me get back to you on that. And the opportunity train flew by. There's a video on YouTube of some kids just acting like idiots. I think it's under the category of instant karma. They're all standing on a train track in India as this high-speed rail is flying by. And first they're standing in the tracks of the train, and the train is honking, and they just want to see who's brave enough to stay the longest. It's like playing chicken with the train. And there are 5 or 6 teenagers playing this little game. Well, as the train gets closer and the horn is wailing and it's barreling down on them, all of them rush off the tracks and into the rocks away from the train. One brave young soul steps out far enough that the majority of the train passes him, and he has his back to the train and very smugly, very complacently, crosses his hands behind his back as if to say, nothing's going to touch me now. And then suddenly, something sticking out from the side of the train catches him in the back of the head, knocks him head over heels and unconscious, and leaves him beside the train track. That's kind of like what that moment of opportunity was for me. I told her my premise. I told her my idea, my ability to articulate what my ideal was 7 years ago. She's like, wow, I love that presentation. I love that idea. Now, I just listened to her talk for 45 minutes. I know the caliber of people that she hires. I know what she expects to see on the stage. I know who she puts them in front of. And I know her average budget. Pretty solid 5 figures for a speaker for an hour. I got this fish on the hook. She's interested in what I have to say. She's interested in the possibility of taking this to the next level. And I got nothing. I didn't have a business card. I didn't have a postcard. I didn't have a sales sheet. I didn't have a description of the product. And because I knew I wasn't ready, and I was terrified of overselling myself and under-delivering, I never even asked for her card. To this day, I can't tell you her name. I couldn't reach her, couldn't contact her if I had to. There's no opportunity for a follow-up on that sale. I was not content with my ability to present to her. I was complacent with the understanding that I'm not here yet. I haven't arrived at the ability. I don't really deserve the opportunity. I've given up on myself before I've even gotten out of the starting blocks. I'm not good enough. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I probably had someone else to blame besides myself for that lack of preparation. The truth is, I just wasn't prepared. I wasn't ready. Opportunity came, and like the teenager standing beside the tracks, I was smacked in the back of the head and left tumbling down the gravel. That opportunity flew by. That train has not been back by. But I've spent the last 7 years coiling up my preparedness like a cat coiled in the corner, ears back, eyes wide open, tail ready. And when opportunity passes like that again, I am loaded for bear and ready to pounce. A couple of those opportunities have come, and they have meant flying to the Congo. Another one's coming up in September. I'll be flying to DC to teach what I teach on leadership and attitude. Where are you? Is your attitude of humility to the degree that you would call yourself content? That you're happy with what you have? And if it doesn't change a great deal for more money, more job, more opportunity, that's okay. I'm okay with where I'm at. I'm perfectly happy with where I am. I love my family. I love my house. Although my car needs a starter right now, that's why my fingernails are greasy, because I do my own mechanic work to the best of my ability. I'm not striving to have more. I'm striving to maximize the gifts that have been placed in me, to do everything I can with everything I have. I am content if that opportunity never comes back again, that the time and the effort and the finances that I've invested in improving the quality of me have been well spent. But I am not complacent. I have not reached the place where I will sit here smugly and say, I've arrived. Or to sit here smugly and say, I'll never succeed and it's someone else's fault. I will strive to leave a vacuum so that someone coming behind me has a place to lead, a thing to do, people to influence, and that my legacy will give them a greater opportunity than they would have had otherwise. I believe that's part of my calling on earth. What's yours? Are you content? Or are you complacent? Are you happy with what you have, but still passionate about doing more for others? Or have you given up? You feel like either I have arrived and I'm all done, or it's never going to happen, so why try? Complacency can be fatalistic. It can be the epitome of arrogance. Where do you stand? I'll leave that question with you to ponder on, to chew on. But don't let your complacency chew up your day. I am Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Remember to share these videos. I really appreciate that. Comment on these videos. I really appreciate that. When you engage in the conversation, it makes all of us wiser. It makes all of us more open to learning. And I appreciate that. And, of course, subscribe. All of these videos are being uploaded daily. They're live streaming right now as we speak to YouTube and Facebook on 2 different platforms. Additionally, what's going on YouTube is being uploaded within 24 hours to the iTunes podcast. You can go to Apple iTunes, type in Loren Norris, and load this as a podcast. And for now, all of it is at no charge. If you would like to sponsor one of these episodes or several of these episodes, send me a private message. We'll talk about it. If you would like to be on one of these episodes in the form of a 2-way conversation, send me a private message and we'll talk about it. I do also host a television program called Meet the Messenger, and we can talk about that too. But I'd really love for you to share, for you to subscribe, and for you to reach out with a comment and share your own ideas. Until then, until tomorrow morning at 6:20 a.m., have a blessed day.